The rope burned against her wrists as rough hands shoved her onto the auction block. Norah Bennett had fled 3,000 miles to escape one prison only to find herself sold like livestock in another. The crowd jeered at her trousers. Unnatural, they called her. The auctioneer's voice boomed, "What am I bid for this stubborn filly?" Her heart hammered as saloon-keeper Richard Thornton raised his hand, eyes gleaming with ownership. Then a quiet voice cut through the chaos. $200, and she can wear what she wants with me. Every head turned. The cowboy's eyes were steel. Stay with me until the end and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Norah's story travels. The Arizona sun beat down on Copper Creek like a punishment from God himself, turning the main street into a ribbon of dust and regret. Norah Bennett stood on that wooden platform with her chin up and her hands bound, refusing to give the crowd the satisfaction of seeing her break. Sweat traced lines down her temples, but she wouldn't bow her head. Not for these people. Not for anyone. Not anymore. Gentlemen, gentlemen. The auctioneer, a pot-bellied man named Silas Crow, strutted across the platform like a rooster in a henhouse. His voice carried that peculiar mixture of showmanship and cruelty that came naturally to men who traded in human dignity. What you see before you is a peculiar specimen indeed, found on the northern road 3 days past, dressed in men's attire, carrying a rifle and riding astride like she owned the whole damn territory. The crowd erupted in laughter and catcalls. Norah's jaw tightened. The trousers in question, practical brown canvas pants she'd bought in Santa Fe, had seemed like common sense when she'd fled Boston 6 weeks ago. How was she supposed to ride 800 miles in petticoats? But common sense, she'd learned, was a luxury afforded only to men in this God-forsaken territory. Now the law's real clear on this matter, Crow continued, warming to his audience. A woman dressed as a man is either insane, immoral, or both. Sheriff Taylor here has determined this one's fit enough for labor, so we're offering her up for correction and employment. 3-year term meals and board, included, starting bid at $50. Norah's stomach lurched. 3 years. She'd escaped her cousin Gerald's house in Boston, survived the brutal crossing by rail and stage, dodged Comanche raiders and Mexican bandits, only to be reduced to this, a commodity, a problem to be solved with rope and paperwork. Do I hear 50? Crow's eyes scanned the crowd of perhaps 80 men, ranch hands, miners, drifters, and merchants. No women. They'd been ushered away when the unsavory business began, hidden behind parlor curtains where they could preserve their delicate sensibilities. A scrawny prospector near the front raised a grimy hand. $50, thank you, sir. Do I hear 60? 60. A barrel-chested man in a leather apron, probably the local blacksmith, joined the bidding. His smile made Norah's skin crawl. 75. Another voice, this one from a cattle rancher in a dusty Stetson. The bids climbed steadily, and with each increase, Norah felt her future narrowing. She scanned the crowd, desperately searching for something, mercy, maybe, or at least a face that didn't carry that gleam of ownership. Most of the men looked at her the way they'd look at a broke horse, something to be tamed, broken, made useful. Then her eyes caught on a man standing apart from the crowd near the hitching post in front of the general store. He was tall, lean, probably 30 or so, with dark hair that needed cutting and a face weathered by sun and wind. He wore plain clothes-worn denim, a faded blue shirt, a gun belt that sat easy on his hips, like it belonged there. But it was his eyes that stopped her. They weren't hungry or amused or cruel. They were angry. 125. The voice came from the center of the crowd, and Norah's blood went cold. Richard Thornton, owner of the Golden Eagle Saloon, pushed his way to the front. He was a handsome man in that polished, dangerous way, slicked hair, expensive vest, manicured hands that had never done an honest day's work. She'd seen him watching her during the trial that morning, the mock legal proceeding where Sheriff Taylor had declared her guilty of moral transgression and public disturbance. Well, Crow's face lit up. Mr. Thornton enters the bidding at $125, a generous offer for a woman of uncertain character. I'll make certain of her character, Thornton said smoothly, and the men around him laughed. 3 years in my establishment, she'll learn proper behavior, learn to dress like a lady, talk like a lady, serve like a lady. The implication was clear as mountain water. Norah's bound hands clenched into fists. She'd kill him first. She'd kill him and hang for it, but she wouldn't. 150. The quiet voice cut through the crowd's laughter like a knife through butter. Every head turned toward the man by the hitching post. He hadn't moved, hadn't raised his hand in the eager way of the other bidders. He just stood there, thumbs hooked in his gun belt, stating a fact. Crow squinted against the sun. Mr. Morgan, is that you didn't expect to see you at $150, the man Morgan repeated. His voice was calm, almost gentle, but it carried. Cash money paid today. Thornton's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by a nobody rancher. 175, he countered sharply. 200. The crowd went dead silent. $200 was serious money, 6 months' wages for a working cowboy, enough to buy 20 head of cattle or a decent piece of land. Morgan said it the same way another man might order coffee, but the weight of it hung in the air like thunderhead. Thornton's face flushed. You're bidding against me, Morgan, over trash in trousers. I'm bidding on a person. Morgan's voice stayed level. And the price is $200. You got more speak now. The challenge was naked unmistakable. It wasn't really about the money anymore. Everyone there knew it. Thornton had money to burn from his saloon profits, his gambling tables, his other enterprises. But something in Morgan's stance, in the way his right hand hung loose near his gun, made it clear this wasn't just an auction anymore. Thornton's eyes narrowed. You making this personal, Cowboy? You're the one talking about making her serve, Morgan replied quietly. I'm just offering employment, fair wages, honest work, no chains. She broke the law. She wore pants. Morgan's voice sharpened just slightly. My sister wore pants too when she worked cattle. Bunch of men decided they didn't like it, decided to teach her proper behavior. His eyes locked on Thornton. She's buried up on my ranch now, under a cottonwood tree, so yeah, maybe I'm making it personal. The silence stretched like taffy. Norah couldn't breathe. The casual revelation of his sister's death, the implication hanging in his words, it changed everything. This wasn't a man looking for cheap labor or a broken thing to mend. This was something else entirely. Crow cleared his throat nervously. Mr. Thornton, do you wish to counter the bid of $225? Thornton snapped. $250. God damn it, Morgan. $250, Morgan repeated. Final offer. Take it or walk away. Thornton's hand twitched toward his coat, where the bulge of a derringer was visible to anyone who knew what to look for. Sheriff Taylor stepped forward quickly, hand on his own gun. Now, gentlemen, this is a legal proceeding, Taylor said, his voice tight. Mr. Thornton, you got a higher bid. The silence lasted maybe 5 heartbeats, but it felt like an hour. Norah watched emotions war across Thornton's face. Pride, anger, calculation. Finally, he smiled, and it was the smile of a snake that knows it'll get another chance at the mouse. Enjoy your purchase, Morgan, he said softly. Hope she's worth the price. He turned and walked away, his men following, but the look he threw back over his shoulder promised this wasn't over. Sold. Crow brought his gavel down with a crack that made Norah flinch. To Mr. Finn Morgan of the Triple M Ranch for $250. The crowd began to disperse, disappointed the entertainment had ended without a proper fight. Finn Morgan walked forward through the thinning throng, his boots thudding on the sun-baked earth. When he reached the platform, he pulled a leather wallet from his vest and counted out the bills with methodical precision. New bills, crisp and clean, he'd come prepared. She's all yours, Mr. Morgan, Crow said, tucking the money away. Papers say 3-year indenture room and board, no abuse per territorial statute. Untie her, Crow blinked. Sir, the rope, take it off her hands. Well, now that's not exactly protocol until you've signed the... Finn's hand moved to his gun belt again, not touching the weapon, just resting there. Untie her now. Sheriff Taylor stepped up quickly. It's fine, Silas. Let's keep this civil. He pulled a knife from his belt and cut through the ropes binding Norah's wrists. The rough hemp fell away, leaving red marks on her skin. Norah rubbed her wrists, trying to process what had just happened. Freedom, or just a different cage. She studied Finn Morgan's face, looking for the trap, the angle, the hidden price. Every man had one. Can you ride? Finn asked her directly, the first time anyone had addressed her, instead of talking about her. Yes, her voice came out raspy from thirst and fear, but steady. You got belongings, things they took from you. A rifle, a saddlebag with my clothes, a horse-brown mare with a white star. Finn nodded and turned to the sheriff. Where's her property? Impounded at my office, but Mr. Morgan, the legal papers. I'll stop by and sign whatever you need, after she gets her things back. The way he said it made it clear it wasn't a request. 20 minutes later, Norah stood in front of the sheriff's office with her rifle back in her hands. A Winchester 73, the only thing of value she'd had in Boston besides her dead father's pocket watch. Her saddlebag was slung over her shoulder, heavier than she remembered. The brown mare, Lucy, stood at the hitching rail, looking reproachful, as if blaming Norah for the 3 days in a strange stable. Finn emerged from the office with rolled papers tucked in his vest. All legal now, he said. You're officially indentured to Triple M Ranch for 3 years, wages of $5 per month plus room and board. Norah's stomach sank. There it was, the cage door clicking shut. And if I refuse, then you go back on that auction block and Thornton will be waiting. Finn's eyes were steady. Law says you got to work somewhere, seeing as how you broke their rules. So you got 2 choices, work for me under contract or work for someone else under worse terms. Some choice, she said bitterly. Yeah. He didn't argue the point. World's not fair, Miss Bennett. Norah Bennett. Miss Bennett, world's not fair, and Arizona law's about as fair as a coyote in a chicken coop. But here's what I can tell you. You work for me. You get paid same as any hand. You get your own cabin, your own space. You wear what you want, ride what you want, and no man on my ranch touches you without your say-so. You break that contract, you're free to go. I won't chase you, won't report you, won't hold you. Norah stared at him. Why would you do that? His jaw tightened. Told you. My sister. Her name was Caroline. She loved horses, loved the ranch work. Some men didn't think that was proper. He stopped, took a breath. They taught her a lesson, with fists and rope and shame. She lasted 2 weeks, after then took my father's pistol into the barn. The pain in his voice was raw, real. Norah felt something crack inside her chest, a tiny fissure in the wall she'd built around herself. I'm sorry, she whispered. Me too. He untied his horse, a big roan gelding with intelligent eyes. But sorry doesn't bring her back. What I can do is make sure it doesn't happen to someone else. So, he swung into the saddle with easy grace. You coming, or you want to take your chances here in town? Norah looked back at Copper Creek, the false-fronted buildings, the dusty street, the men still lounging in front of the saloon watching her. She saw Thornton standing in the doorway of the Golden Eagle Arms, crossed, waiting. She looked at Finn Morgan, this stranger who'd paid a fortune for the privilege of setting her free, or at least freer than she'd been. She didn't trust him, not yet. Couldn't afford to. But she trusted Thornton even less, and the rest of this town not at all. I'm coming, she said, and climbed onto Lucy's back. They rode out of Copper Creek, heading west into the long afternoon sun. The desert stretched out before them, endless and burning and beautiful in its harsh way. Norah didn't look back. Whatever waited ahead, trap or truth freedom, or just a different kind of prison, it had to be better than what she was leaving behind. Behind them, in the shade of the Golden Eagle, Richard Thornton watched them go. His smile was patient. The desert was big, but not big enough, and nobody embarrassed him in front of the whole town without paying for it eventually. The hunt, he decided, would be even more satisfying than the easy purchase would have been. The first hour passed in silence. Norah kept Lucy a careful 10 feet behind Finn's roan, close enough to follow but far enough to run if this turned bad. Her hand never strayed far from the Winchester across her saddle, and her eyes tracked every movement he made, the way he sat his horse, the way his head turned to scan the horizon, the way his right hand stayed loose and ready near his gun. Trust was a luxury she'd stopped being able to afford somewhere around Kansas. The desert rolled out around them in waves of red rock and scrub brush, punctuated by the occasional twisted juniper clinging to life in impossible places. The heat was brutal, turning the air into something you could almost chew. Norah's shirt stuck to her back beneath her vest, and she could feel sweat trickling down her spine, but she didn't complain. Complaining showed weakness, and weakness got you killed, or worse. "There's water in my canteen if you need it," Finn called back without turning around. "We won't reach the first creek for another 2 hours." "I'm fine," Norah lied. Her canteen had been half empty when they'd confiscated it 3 days ago, and the sheriff hadn't bothered refilling it before returning her things. Finn reined in his horse and turned to look at her properly, for the first time since they'd left town. His eyes were the color of creek water, in shadow gray, green, and unreadable. "Miss Bennett, we got about 6 hours of riding ahead of us, and it's only getting hotter. Pride's a fine thing, but it won't keep you alive out here. Drink the water." He untied his canteen from his saddle and tossed it to her in a gentle arc. She caught it one-handed, surprised by the weight of it, full or near enough. She hesitated, then uncapped it and took a long swallow. The water was warm but clean, tasting faintly of metal and leather. "Thank you," she said stiffly, tossing it back. He caught it with the same easy grace and retied it to his saddle. "You're welcome. We look out for each other on the trail. That's how it works." "Is that what we are, partners on the trail?" "Don't know what we are yet," Finn admitted. "But I figure we got the ride to Triple M to start figuring it out." He nudged his horse forward again. "You can ride beside me if you want. Easier to talk that way, or you can stay back there if that makes you feel safer. Your choice." Norah considered. Everything in her screamed to keep the distance, maintain the escape route. But something in his tone, the complete absence of offense, the genuine offer of choice, made her curious despite herself. She urged Lucy forward until they were riding side by side. "Better," Finn said. "Now I don't have to shout." They rode in silence for another few minutes. Then Norah's curiosity got the better of her caution. "Why did you really buy me?" "Told you, my sister." "No." She cut him off, keeping her voice level. "I mean, yes, I believe that's part of it. But $250, that's not sentiment. That's half a year's profit for a small ranch. So what's the real reason?" Finn's jaw worked for a moment, like he was chewing on the question. Finally, he said, "You want the honest answer. I wouldn't have asked otherwise." "Fair enough." He adjusted his hat against the sun. "Truth is, I got back to Copper Creek yesterday after 2 weeks moving cattle to Tucson. I was tired, dirty, looking forward to a drink and a bath before heading home. Then I heard the commotion in the street, saw the crowd gathering, saw you up on that block." He paused. "Saw the way you were standing. The way I was standing, head up, eyes forward, wouldn't bow, wouldn't beg, wouldn't break. Every man there was trying to make you small, and you just wouldn't." He glanced at her. "Reminded me so much of Caroline, it hurt to breathe. She was like that too. Stubborn as a mule, my pa used to say. Wouldn't back down, wouldn't compromise who she was." "Look where it got her," Norah said quietly. "Yeah." The word came out rough. Look where it got her, which is exactly why I couldn't walk away. Couldn't let you end up in Thornton's saloon or working yourself to death for some bastard who'd take your wages and break your spirit. He shook his head. Maybe it's stupid. Maybe I'm trying to save someone who doesn't need saving, trying to fix something that can't be fixed. But I had the money, and I had the need, and there you were. Norah absorbed this, turning it over in her mind like a puzzle box. It had the ring of truth, but truth and trap could wear the same face. And you expect nothing in return, no obligations. Finn's head whipped around, and for the first time she saw real anger flash across his face. I expect you to work. Keep books, manage accounts, help with the ranch business if you're able. I expect you to pull your weight same as any hand. But if you're asking if I expect you in my bed, his voice went cold as winter stone. Then no, Miss Bennett. I got no use for a woman who comes to me out of debt or fear or obligation. The day I can't find a willing partner is the day I stop looking. The certainty in his voice, the pure offense at the suggestion, loosened something in Norah's chest. She'd heard plenty of pretty words from men before Gerald had been full of them, right up until the night he'd tried to force his way into her room, and she'd split his lip with her father's paperweight. But Finn's anger felt different, felt real. I'm sorry, she said. I had to ask. Yeah. Some of the tension left his shoulders. I suppose you did. World hasn't given you much reason to trust men, has it? Not recently. They fell back into silence, but it was a different kind now, less hostile, more contemplative. The sun arced slowly across the sky, and the landscape began to shift the flat desert, giving way to rolling hills dotted with more vegetation. Norah spotted cattle in the distance, maybe 50 head, grazing near a line of cottonwoods that suggested water. Triple M land starts about here, Finn said, following her gaze. We run about 2,000 head across 15 sections. Not the biggest operation in the territory, but it's mine, free and clear. My pa homesteaded it 20 years back, built it up from nothing. When he passed 4 years ago, it came to me and Caroline. After he stopped, swallowed. After it was just me. No other family. Ma died of cholera when I was 12. Got an uncle in Colorado, but we don't talk much. He pointed ahead to where the hills rose higher. Ranch house is about an hour more. We'll get there before dark if we don't dawdle. As they rode, Norah found herself studying him more openly. He was younger than she'd first thought, probably not yet 30, though the sun and hard work had etched lines around his eyes that added years. His hands were scarred and callous, the hands of a man who didn't ask others to do work he wouldn't do himself. He sat his horse like he'd been born in the saddle, moving with the animal's rhythm in that unconscious way that spoke of a lifetime's practice. Can I ask you something? Finn said suddenly. I suppose turnabout is fair. Why Boston? And why were you running? Norah's first instinct was to deflect, to lie, to keep her secrets close. But something about the vast, empty landscape, the strange intimacy of two people alone under an endless sky, made her want to tell the truth, or at least part of it. My father died 18 months ago, she said quietly. Fever took him in 3 days. He was a banker, left me enough to live modestly, but he also left me in the guardianship of his nephew, my cousin Gerald. The will specified I couldn't inherit fully until I married or reached 25. How old are you now? 22. 3 more years seemed like an eternity when Gerald started. She stopped, swallowed. He decided I should marry his business partner, a man named Clement Ashford, 45 years old, twice widowed, looking for a young wife to give him heirs. Gerald would get a profitable partnership. Ashford would get me and my inheritance. I would get a lifetime of being property. So you ran. So I ran. She looked out at the hills, at the freedom of all that space. Took what I could carry, sold what I couldn't, bought passage west. Figured I'd disappear somewhere big and empty, somewhere they'd never think to look. She laughed bitterly. Didn't quite work out that way. They'll be looking for you, Finn said. It wasn't a question. Probably, Gerald doesn't like losing things he considers his, and the inheritance. She shook her head. That's enough money to make it worth his while to search. Finn was quiet for a moment, thinking. This Gerald, he got connections, law, politics, that sort of thing. He knows people, has favors to call in. Why? Because Thornton's got connections too, owns half the territorial legislature through bribes and blackmail, or so the rumors go. If your cousin came looking and Thornton got wind of a reward... He let the implication hang. A chill went through Norah despite the heat. She hadn't thought of that, hadn't imagined that the danger from Copper Creek and the danger from Boston might somehow combine into something worse. You think Thornton would... I think Thornton's a snake who sees opportunity in other people's misfortune. And I think you embarrassed him today, which makes you interesting twice over. Finn glanced at her. But that's a problem for tomorrow. Today, we just get you home safe. Home. The word caught in Norah's throat. She hadn't had a home in so long she'd almost forgotten what it felt like to have one. The sun was touching the western hills when they finally crested a ridge, and Norah got her first look at the Triple M ranch. It spread out in a shallow valley below them, sheltered by hills on three sides and open to the south. A creek ran silver through the middle of it, lined with cottonwoods and willows. The main house was solid adobe, with a wooden porch not fancy but well built and maintained. Beyond it stood a barn, a bunkhouse, several corrals, and a handful of smaller outbuildings. There were people moving around down there, 3, maybe 4 men tending to evening chores. Smoke rose from the cookhouse chimney, promising food and warmth. Home, Finn said simply. Welcome to Triple M, Miss Bennett. They rode down the slope and into the ranch yard. The men stopped what they were doing, tools falling idle, as they watched Finn and Norah approach. Their faces were weathered, cautious, openly curious. Norah felt their eyes on her, assessing, judging. Her hand tightened on the saddle horn. Finn dismounted and tied his horse to the rail. Boys, this is Miss Norah Bennett. She'll be working for the ranch starting today. Miss Bennett, this is my crew. A grizzled man with a gray beard stepped forward first. He had to be 60 if he was a day, with shrewd eyes that missed nothing. Jake Calloway, he said. Been with this ranch since Mr. Morgan Sr. broke ground. You the woman from Copper Creek everyone's talking about. News travels fast, Norah said, dismounting carefully. Her legs felt shaky after the long ride. Bad news always does. Jake looked her up and down, not unkindly. You know how to work, or you just another mouth to feed? Jake, Finn warns. No, it's all right. Norah met the old man's eyes steadily. I can keep books, manage accounts, read legal documents, and write correspondence. I can ride, shoot, and cook if necessary. I'm not afraid of hard work, and I don't expect special treatment. What I don't know, I can learn. Fair enough. Jake's weathered face cracked into something that might have been a smile. Fair enough. We'll see if you mean it. The other men introduced themselves in turn. Tom Bradley, young and eager, couldn't have been more than 19. Miguel Reyes, quiet and competent, nodded respectfully, but kept his distance. And Samuel Sam Kincaid, broad-shouldered and friendly, actually smiled at her. Welcome to Triple M, Miss Bennett, Sam said. Don't mind Jake. He's suspicious of everyone until they prove themselves. Took me 6 months before he'd trust me with the good horses. Took you 6 months to stop falling off the good horses. Jake shot back, but there was affection in it. Finn stepped forward. Miss Bennett will be taking the old overseer's cabin. It needs cleaning, but it's sound. Tom, can you help get it ready? Fresh linens, firewood, the basics. Miss Bennett, I'll show you the office tomorrow and we'll talk about your actual duties. Tonight, just get settled. The cabin turned out to be a small adobe structure about 100 yards from the main house, tucked against a hillside with a view of the creek. It had one room with a stone fireplace, a narrow bed, a table with 2 chairs, and a trunk for storage. Simple, but it was private, and the door had a good, strong bolt on the inside. Norah stood in the doorway after Tom and Sam had brought in fresh bedding and firewood. staring at this small space that was suddenly impossibly hers. She'd spent the last 6 weeks sleeping in stage stops and cheap hotels, always looking over her shoulder, always ready to run. This was different. This was something close to permanent. "You all right?" Finn's voice came from behind her. He'd stayed back while the others worked, giving her space. "Yes," Norah said. It's more than I expected. It's not much. It's perfect." She turned to look at him. "Thank you for all of it." Finn shifted uncomfortably, like gratitude made him uneasy. "Don't thank me yet. Wait until you've tried Jake's coffee. Stuff could strip paint off a barn door." He backed away toward the main house. "Supper's at 6. Come up when you're ready. Or don't, if you'd rather have quiet. Your choice." "Finn," she stopped him before he could leave. "That thing you said in town, about me wearing what I want, did you mean it? Every word?" His eyes were steady on hers. "You want to wear trousers every day for the next 3 years, that's your business. You want to wear a dress, that's your business too. Only person who gets a say in what you wear is you." After he left, Norah sank down onto the edge of the bed, her legs finally giving out. She sat there in the gathering darkness, listening to the sounds of the ranch, settling in for evening, men's voices calling to each other, horses nickering in the corral, the eternal whisper of wind through juniper. Through the window she could see the main house, warm light spilling from its windows. For the first time in 18 months, since her father had died and left her at Gerald's mercy, Norah felt something unfurl in her chest. Not quite hope, she was too battered for that, but maybe the possibility of hope, the shadow of its ghost. She lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling beams. Tomorrow she'd start proving herself. Tomorrow she'd begin learning whether Finn Morgan's promises held weight or were just pretty words that would dissolve in sunlight. Tomorrow she'd find out if this place could really be a sanctuary or if it was just another beautiful trap. But tonight, for this one single night, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she'd finally found something worth staying for. In the main house, Finn stood at his window, looking out toward the small cabin where a single candle now flickered. Jake came up beside him, 2 glasses of whiskey in his hands. He offered one to Finn without comment. "You sure about this?" Jake asked after a moment. "No," Finn admitted. "But I'm sure about not leaving her there. That's enough for now. She's running from something. You know that right, woman doesn't cross half a country alone unless she's desperate." "I know." Finn took a sip of whiskey, felt it burn all the way down. "We're all running from something, Jake. Every person on this ranch came here because somewhere else hurt too much, including you." Jake grunted, which was as close to agreement as he ever got. "Fair enough. Just don't let this be Caroline all over again. I liked that girl. Broke my heart when—" He stopped, cleared his throat roughly. "Just be careful is all I'm saying." "I will." But as Finn watched that distant candle flicker, he wondered if careful was even possible anymore. The moment he'd stepped forward in that auction, the moment he'd said those words, "She can wear what she wants with me," he'd set something in motion that couldn't be undone. For better or worse, Norah Bennett's story was now tangled up with his 2 threads, woven together by fate and fury and a single impulsive choice. He just hoped it wouldn't end the way Caroline's had, with dirt and tears and a grave under the cottonwoods. In the darkness outside Copper Creek, 20 miles to the east, Richard Thornton sat in his private office above the Golden Eagle saloon pen, scratching across paper. He was writing to a contact in Santa Fe, a man who knew other men who could find things out for a price. Names, background, secrets. Everyone had secrets. And Miss Norah Bennett, in her scandalous trousers with her refined Boston accent and educated manner, surely had secrets worth discovering. Finn Morgan had made this personal, had embarrassed him, challenged him, taken what Thornton had wanted right out from under him. That was a mistake. In this territory, Richard Thornton always got what he wanted one way or another. He signed the letter with a flourish, sealed it with wax, and smiled into the lamplight. Patience, he counseled himself. Patience and planning. The desert was vast, but not vast enough to hide for long. And when he finally claimed his prize, both the woman and his revenge, it would be all the sweeter for the wait. The hunt had officially begun. 3 months changed everything and nothing at all. Norah fell into the rhythm of ranch life like she'd been born to it, though her hands told a different story. The soft palms of a Boston banker's daughter had given way to calluses and rope burns, small badges of honor she wore with quiet pride. Every morning she woke before dawn to the sound of roosters and men's voices dressed in her trousers and one of the plain cotton shirts she'd bought with her first month's wages, and walked to the main house where the ranch's chaotic bookkeeping waited for her like an old enemy. Finn's father had been many things: a good rancher, a fair boss, a loving parent, but organized he was not. The account books were a disaster of crossed-out entries, missing receipts and calculations that didn't add up. It took Norah 2 full weeks just to sort out how much the ranch actually owed versus how much it was owed, and another week to realize they were missing nearly $300 in unpaid debts from buyers in Tucson and Santa Fe. "You're telling me Johnson's been shorting us for 2 years? Finn had stared at her neat columns of figures, like they were written in a foreign language. Not shorting exactly, more like conveniently forgetting. Norah tapped the ledger with her pencil. "See here, he takes delivery of 20 head pays for 18. Next month 22 head pays for 20, small enough amounts that it doesn't raise flags, but over 2 years it adds up to $300, son of a bitch." Finn ran a hand through his hair. A gesture she'd learned meant he was working through a problem. "I'll ride to Tucson next week, have a conversation with him. Or," Norah said carefully, "you could let me write him a letter." Very polite, very professional, detailing every discrepancy with dates and amounts. Sometimes men respond better to documentation than accusations. Less pride involved. Finn had looked at her for a long moment, then smiled, one of those rare, genuine smiles that transformed his whole face. "Do it, and if he doesn't pay up after that, then I'll have my conversation." The letter worked. 2 weeks later, a bank draft arrived for the full amount plus interest, along with a terse note claiming accounting errors. Finn had given Norah a bonus of $10 from his own pocket, which she'd tried to refuse until he'd simply left it on her desk and walked away. That was Finn's way, she'd learned. Quiet generosity, uncomfortable with thanks, more comfortable showing respect through action than words. He treated her exactly as he'd promised, as an employee, a valued one, but nothing more. He never came to her cabin uninvited, never touched her beyond the occasional hand offered to help her mount a difficult horse, never looked at her with anything other than professional regard. It should have been a relief. It was a relief. But sometimes late at night when she couldn't sleep, Norah found herself wondering what it would be like if those gray-green eyes held something warmer than respect. The ranch hands had been harder to win over than Finn, but she'd managed it through sheer stubborn competence. Jake had been the toughest nut to crack, testing her with impossible tasks and watching hawk-eyed for any sign of weakness. The day she'd spent 6 hours in the saddle helping move cattle through a narrow canyon without complaint, then come back and finish the day's bookwork. By lamplight he'd grunted something that might have been approval and started leaving fresh coffee on her desk each morning. Sam had been easy. He was friendly to everyone and seemed genuinely pleased to have another person around who could read more than just cattle brands. Tom was still a bit shy around her, but he'd started asking her to help him with his letters home to his mother, dictating news while Norah translated his rambling thoughts into coherent sentences. Miguel remained polite but distant, though she'd caught him smiling once when she'd cursed in Spanish after hitting her thumb with a hammer. She'd learned the language from her father's housekeeper in Boston, never imagining it would come in handy on an Arizona ranch. It was a good life, she realized one evening in early November as she sat on her cabin porch watching the sunset paint the hills in shades of amber and rose. Hard, yes. Dusty and hot and sometimes lonely, but honest, clean, hers. That's when Finn came walking down from the main house, and she knew from his expression that something had changed. "Town social this Saturday," he said without preamble. "Annual harvest dance in Copper Creek. Whole county turns out for it." Norah's stomach clenched. She hadn't been back to Copper Creek since that day on the auction block, hadn't wanted to face those people, those memories. "Do we have to go?" "Don't have to do anything," Finn said. "But it's good politics. I sell cattle to half the ranchers who'll be there buy supplies from the other half. And," he hesitated, "might be good for you too. Show the town you're not what they thought you were, that you're a respectable working woman, not some criminal in need of correction." "I'll still be wearing pants," Norah said quietly. "To the social?" Finn raised an eyebrow. "Might make dancing difficult, but it's your choice. You want me to wear a dress?" It wasn't a question. Finn sat down on the porch step uninvited and looked out at the sunset. "Want? No. I meant what I said that day. You wear what makes you comfortable. But I also know how the world works. You show up in trousers, every gossip in the county will have you pegged as unnatural before you even open your mouth. You show up in a dress acting like a lady doing business, like a lady being exactly what they claim you're not." He shrugged. "Might change some minds, might make life easier, might make me a liar," Norah said. "Pretending to be something I'm not just to make them comfortable." "Fair point." Finn stood, dusting off his pants. "Like I said, your choice. I'll be going either way, got business to conduct. If you want to come, wagon leaves at 4 on Saturday. If not, no hard feelings." He was halfway back to the main house when Norah called after him, "Buzz. Your sister, Caroline, did she ever compromise, wear the dresses, play the part?" Finn stopped but didn't turn around. His shoulders were tense. "For a while. Thought it would make things easier, make people accept her, but it just made her miserable, made her feel like she was betraying herself every time she put on those skirts." He finally looked back and his eyes were haunted. "I used to tell her it didn't matter what she wore, that I loved her no matter what. Wish I'd told her more often. Wish I'd—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "Just think about it. Whatever you decide, I'll stand by it." After he left, Norah sat on her porch until full dark, wrestling with the question. Pride versus practicality, authenticity versus strategy, who she was versus who the world wanted her to be. Finally, she went inside and opened the trunk at the foot of her bed. Buried at the bottom, wrapped in old newspaper, was the one dress she'd brought from Boston. A simple day dress in dark blue wool, high-necked and long-sleeved, the kind of thing a respectable woman wore to church or social calls. She'd packed it as insurance, a costume she could wear if she needed to disappear into propriety. She held it up to the lamplight, studying the foreign shape of it. 3 months ago, this had been her uniform, her prison, the cloth cage that marked her as female and therefore less. Now it was just fabric, a tool, a choice. Saturday, she decided. She'd wear the dress on Saturday. Not because Finn had asked, not because the town expected it, but because sometimes you had to speak the enemy's language to win the war. And if there was one thing her father had taught her before he died, it was that winning mattered more than pride. Saturday arrived, cold and clear, the first real bite of winter in the morning air. Norah dressed carefully in the blue wool, her fingers fumbling with buttons she hadn't fastened in months. She'd washed her hair the night before and pinned it up in a simple style, nothing fancy but respectable. When she looked at herself in the small mirror above her washstand, a stranger stared back, familiar and foreign all at once. The ride to Copper Creek took 2 hours in the wagon. Finn drove dressed in his best shirt and a clean vest, his hat brushed free of dust. Jake and Sam rode alongside on horseback, also cleaned up for the occasion. The mood was light, the men trading jokes and stories, while Norah sat quiet, her hands folded in her lap, stomach churning with nerves. "You look nice," Finn said quietly, so only she could hear. "But you looked fine in trousers too, just so you know." "It's strategy," Norah replied. Like wearing war paint. He smiled at that. Good way to think of it. Copper Creek was transformed for the social. The main street had been swept clean, bunting hung from every post and lanterns, strung between buildings, promised light once the sun went down. The actual dance was being held in the largest building in town, the community hall, a sprawling adobe structure that served as church, courthouse, and social center, depending on the day. People were already arriving when they pulled up, ranchers and townfolk in their Sunday-best, children running wild between the wagons. Norah saw curious looks thrown their way, whispers behind hands. She kept her chin up and her face neutral, the way she'd learned to do at her cousin's awful dinner parties in Boston. Finn helped her down from the wagon, his hand steady and impersonal. "Stay close if you want," he murmured, "or explore on your own if you prefer. I'll be making the rounds talking business. We'll leave when you're ready." The hall was decorated with fall branches and paper flowers, tables groaning with food brought by every family in the county. A small band was setting up in one corner, fiddle, guitar, and accordion. The air smelled of cornbread and roasted meat, and too many people in too small a space. Norah had barely taken 3 steps inside when she felt the weight of attention shift toward her. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Eyes tracked her movement. She heard her name whispered, or at least what they thought was her name. "That's the one. From the auction. Morgan's woman." She wasn't Morgan's woman, but she bit back the correction. Let them think what they wanted. She was here to be seen, to be respectable, to prove them wrong by existing. "Miss Bennett?" A woman's voice, warm and friendly. Norah turned to find a handsome woman in her 40s, approaching her, smile genuine. "I'm Martha Holbrook. My husband owns the general store. I wanted to say hello, welcome you properly to the county." "Thank you," Norah said carefully, waiting for the trap. "I also wanted to apologize." Martha's smile faded into something more serious. "For the town, for what happened when you arrived. It was shameful the way you were treated. Not everyone agreed with it, though. I'm ashamed to say not enough of us spoke up." The unexpected kindness hit Norah like a physical blow. She'd been braced for hostility, for judgment, for the same contempt she'd faced on that auction block. This woman's genuine regret left her momentarily speechless. Thank you," she managed. "That means more than you know. Are you settling in well at Triple M? Finn's a good man. Decent employer from what I hear." "He is. Very fair. The work is hard, but honest." They talked for a few more minutes, Martha introducing her to other women who approached with varying degrees of warmth and curiosity. Some were genuinely kind, some merely polite, some openly skeptical but willing to withhold judgment. It wasn't acceptance exactly, but it was better than Norah had dared hope for. The music started around 7, fiddle and accordion launching into a lively reel. Couples moved onto the floor, and the hall transformed from tense social gathering into something warmer, more alive. Norah found herself standing near the refreshment table watching the dancers and feeling oddly out of place despite the dress, despite the polite conversations, despite everything. "You look like you're at a funeral instead of a dance." The voice came from behind her, smooth and familiar in the worst way. Norah's blood went cold before she even turned around. Richard Thornton stood there in an expensive suit, hair, pomaded, smile sharp as broken glass. He held a cup of punch in each hand and offered one to her like they were old friends. "Miss Bennett, what a transformation. I almost didn't recognize you in women's clothing." "Mr. Thornton." She didn't take the offered cup. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I'm a pillar of the community, my dear. I attend all the socials." His eyes traveled over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "Though I must say the dress is a vast improvement, much more becoming than those scandalous trousers. Perhaps Morgan's influence is civilizing you after all." "Mr. Morgan's influence has been nothing but respectful," Norah said coldly, "which is more than I can say for some people." Thornton's smile didn't waver, but something flickered behind his eyes, something dangerous. Of course. Finn Morgan, the perfect gentleman, the noble savior. Tell me, has he tired of you yet?" 3 months is a long time for a man to go without companionship, especially with a woman living right on his property. You're disgusting. I'm practical. He set down both cups and moved closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. I made inquiries after our last meeting, Miss Bennett, or should I say Miss Norah Catherine Bennett of Boston, Massachusetts, daughter of the late Charles Bennett Ward of Gerald Bennett, Esquire. Quite the story, your flight west. Quite the scandal back home. Norah's heart stopped. The noise of the dance faded into white silence. He knew somehow this snake had found out who she really was. I see I have your attention now. Thornton's smile widened. Don't worry, your secret is safe with me, for now. But I wonder what Sheriff Taylor would think if he knew there was a warrant for your arrest back east. Theft of family property, abandonment of legal guardianship, possibly kidnapping charges. If your cousin really wanted to press the issue. Those are lies. Norah's voice shook despite her best efforts. I took nothing that wasn't mine. Perhaps. But perception is reality in the eyes of the law, and the right telegram to the right people could make your life very complicated. He straightened his voice, returning to normal volume. Think about it, Miss Bennett. I'm a patient man, and I always get what I want, eventually. He walked away, melting into the crowd, leaving Norah shaking by the refreshment table. Her mind raced terror and fury, warring for dominance. How had he found out? How much did he really know? And what was he planning to do with the information? Norah. Finn appeared at her elbow, his face concerned. You all right? You look like you've seen a ghost. She couldn't tell him. Not here, not now, not surrounded by all these people. But she also couldn't stay here another minute with Thornton circling like a vulture. I need air. Can we step outside? Of course. He guided her through the crowd, his hand on her elbow, steady and grounding. They emerged into the cool night air, away from the noise and lights and watching eyes. Norah sucked in great lungfuls of air, trying to calm the panic clawing at her chest. Finn waited patient until she could speak. He knows, she finally whispered. Thornton, he knows who I am, knows about Boston, about Gerald, about why I ran. He's threatening me. Finn's expression went very still, very cold. Tell me everything. So she did. Standing there in the darkness behind the hall, with music drifting out and stars blazing overhead, she told him the whole truth. About her father's death, about Gerald's plans to marry her off, about the theft accusations that were lies, but might stick anyway if the right people pushed the right buttons. About Clement Ashford and the inheritance and the desperation that had driven her west. When she finished, Finn was quiet for a long moment. Then he said very calmly, I'm going to kill him. Finn, no, not literally. He ran a hand through his hair, that familiar gesture. But we're going to fight this, every word of it. First thing Monday, we're going to the sheriff with your side of the story. Then we're sending telegrams to San Francisco. You said you have an uncle there. My father's brother, Uncle James, but we haven't spoken in years. I don't know if We'll find out. We'll get documentation proof of your inheritance letters from anyone back east who can testify to your character. His voice was firm, decisive, the voice of a man used to solving problems. Thornton's playing a game trying to scare you, but games have rules and we're going to beat him at his own. You don't understand, Norah said desperately. He has money, connections, influence. He could destroy both of us if he wanted to. Let him try. Finn's eyes met hers, fierce and unwavering. The Triple M stands by its own, Norah. I said that the day I bought you, and I meant it. You're not facing this alone. The words cracked something open inside her chest, something she'd kept carefully locked away for 3 months. Before she could think better of it, before fear or propriety could stop her, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, pressing her face against his chest and just holding on. Finn went rigid for a heartbeat, surprised. Then his arms came around her, gentle but solid, and he held her while she shook. Not crying, not quite, but close. Just letting herself be held, be protected, be less alone than she'd felt in so long. "We'll figure this out," he murmured against her hair. "I promise." They stood like that for a long moment before voices nearby made them spring apart. Two men were coming around the corner laughing about something. Finn stepped back immediately, restoring the proper distance, but his eyes held something new when he looked at her, something warmer than respect, deeper than friendship. "We should get back," he said quietly, "before people talk." "Let them talk," Norah said, surprising herself. "I'm tired of caring what people think." They went back inside, but the evening was ruined. Every time Norah saw Thornton across the room, his smile was a promise of trouble to come. When Finn finally declared it time to leave around 10, she nearly sagged with relief. The ride home was quiet, everyone tired and thoughtful, but as they pulled into the Triple M yard and Finn helped her down from the wagon, he held her hand just a moment longer than necessary. "Get some rest," he said softly. "Tomorrow we start fighting back." Norah nodded and walked to her cabin, the blue dress suddenly feeling less like armor and more like a costume she couldn't wait to shed. But when she lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, she kept thinking about the moment Finn's arms had closed around her, the solid warmth of him, the sense of safety, the feeling of not being alone. 3 months ago, she'd believed she'd never trust a man again. Now she was starting to realize that maybe, just maybe, she'd already started trusting one without even noticing, and that terrified her almost as much as Thornton's threats. In Copper Creek, Thornton sat in his office above the Golden Eagle, reading through the file of documents his investigator had compiled. Birth certificates, property records, newspaper announcements of Charles Bennett's death, legal notices of guardianship. Every piece of ammunition he needed to destroy Norah Bennett and humiliate Finn Morgan in the process. He'd waited 3 months watching and planning. Now it was time to act. The Harvest Social had been just the opening move, a warning shot to let her know he held all the cards. Next would come the real attack, the telegrams, the legal documents, the slow tightening of the noose. By the time he was done, Norah Bennett would have nowhere to run. And Finn Morgan would learn what happened to Maine, who challenged Richard Thornton's authority. He poured himself a whiskey and toasted his own reflection in the dark window. To patience, he thought, and to the sweet taste of revenge served cold. Monday morning came too fast and too slow all at once. Norah had barely slept, her mind spinning through worst scenarios, until dawn painted her cabin walls gray. She dressed in her trousers again, the blue dress folded away like a weapon. She'd only draw when necessary, and walked to the main house to find Finn already saddled and waiting. "We ride to town together," he said simply. "Jake's coming too. 3 of us will make a stronger impression than one." Jake emerged from the barn leading his own horse, his weathered face set in grim lines. "Heard what happened Saturday night," he said to Norah. "Thornton's a snake, always has been. Time somebody stepped on him proper." The solidarity warmed something in Norah's chest, even as fear kept her stomach in knots. They rode out as the sun cleared the eastern hills, 3 riders against whatever storm was coming. Sheriff Taylor's office sat on the main street of Copper Creek, a squat adobe building with iron bars on the windows and the territory's seal painted on the door. Taylor himself was sitting behind his desk when they walked in, boots propped up, reading a week-old newspaper. He looked up, and his expression shifted from lazy comfort to wary attention. "Morgan, Jake, Miss Bennett." He swung his feet down. "Wasn't expecting a delegation this morning. Something I can help you with." "We need to talk," Finn said, closing the door behind them, "about Richard Thornton and some threats he made against Miss Bennett at the social." Taylor's face went carefully neutral. "Threats? That's a serious accusation. It's a serious situation." Finn gestured for Norah to speak. She stepped forward, forcing her voice steady. "Mr. Thornton approached me Saturday night. He claims to have information about my past, about why I came to Arizona. He implied he could cause legal trouble for me if I don't cooperate with whatever he wants. What kind of information? Taylor asked. Personal family matters, a guardianship dispute back in Boston. My cousin claimed I stole from him when I left, but it's not true. I only took what was mine by right. But Thornton seems to think he can use those accusations against me. Taylor was quiet for a moment, his fingers drumming on the desk. And you're telling me this? Why, if you've got warrants back east, that's a legal matter I'd have to address. There are no warrants, Finn said firmly. That's the point. Thornton's making threats based on lies and half-truths, trying to intimidate Miss Bennett into doing God knows what. That's extortion, Sheriff. That's a crime. If I had proof, maybe. Taylor spread his hands. But right now, all I've got is your word against Thornton's, and Thornton's a respected businessman in this county, sits on the town council, donates to the church. Bribes the territorial legislature, Jake interrupted. Runs girls out of his saloon, fixes card games, sells watered whiskey. Everyone knows it, Sheriff. Just 'cause he's got money don't make him respectable. Taylor's jaw tightened. Watch your mouth, Jake. I won't have you slandering. It's not slander if it's true, Finn said quietly. And you know it is. The question is whether you're going to do your job or whether Thornton's got you in his pocket too. The words hung in the air like gun smoke. Taylor stood slowly, his hand resting near his gun belt. That's a dangerous thing to say, Morgan. Truth usually is. Finn didn't back down. I'm not looking for trouble, Sheriff. I'm looking for justice. Miss Bennett has done nothing wrong. She's a valued employee of my ranch, working honestly, paying her way. If Thornton's threatening her based on false information, that needs to stop. Now. And if the information's not false, then we prove it's not. Finn pulled an envelope from his vest. I've written to Miss Bennett's uncle in San Francisco, a respected attorney. I'm also prepared to hire investigators in Boston to document the truth of her situation. We'll get affidavits, legal statements, whatever's needed. But in the meantime, I expect the law to protect an innocent woman from harassment. Taylor took the envelope, glanced at the address, then looked back at Finn. Something shifted in his expression, not quite respect, but maybe acknowledgement. You're putting a lot on the line for an employee. She's more than that, Finn said, and Norah's heart skipped despite the tension. She's under my protection. Triple M takes care of its own. Noble words. Taylor sat back down suddenly, looking tired. Look, I'll be straight with you. Thornton came to see me yesterday. Showed me telegrams, documents, all official looking. Claims Miss Bennett's a fugitive, that her family's looking for her, that there might be rewards involved. Said he was doing his civic duty, bringing it to my attention. Norah felt the floor tilt beneath her. He's lying, or the documents are forged. My cousin would do anything to get me back, including fabricate evidence. Maybe so, but until I know for certain, I can't just ignore it. Taylor looked at her, and for the first time she saw something like sympathy in his eyes. I'm sorry, Miss Bennett. I don't like Thornton any more than Jake does, but I've got a job to do. If there's warrants, there aren't, Finn said flatly. Give us 2 weeks. Let us gather our proof, contact her uncle, get the real story documented. 2 weeks, and if we can't prove her innocence, I'll bring her back here myself. And if she runs, she won't. Finn looked at Norah, and she saw the trust in his eyes, the absolute certainty. Will you? No, Norah whispered, tired. I'm done running. Taylor studied them both, weighing options, calculating risks. Finally, he sighed. 2 weeks. But Miss Bennett doesn't leave the county, and Morgan, you're responsible for her. She disappears. I'm coming after you both. Clear, clear. Finn extended his hand. After a moment, Taylor shook it. They were halfway to the door when Taylor called out, Morgan, watch your back. Thornton doesn't like losing, and he's got friends in places I can't protect you from. Just be careful. The warning followed them out into the bright morning. They rode back to Triple M in tense silence, each lost in their own thoughts. It wasn't until they were back in the ranch office door closed that Finn finally let his controlled facade crack. "Forged documents," he said, pacing like a caged animal. "That son of a bitch actually forged legal documents. That's a federal crime." "Can we prove it?" Norah asked. She sat at the desk, her hands shaking slightly. "If they look official, if he's got good forgers, we prove it by getting real documents that contradict them. Your uncle in San Francisco, you said he's a lawyer." "Was. He might be retired by now, and like I said, we haven't spoken since my father's funeral. He and my father had some falling out years ago. I never knew what about." "Doesn't matter. Blood's blood. We write him today, explain everything, ask for his help." Finn stopped pacing and looked at her. "What about friends in Boston? Anyone who'd testify to your character, to what really happened?" Norah thought hard. "My father's clerk, maybe, Thomas Weaver. He was there when the will was read, saw how Gerald behaved after. And there was my governess, Mrs. Adelaide Harper. She retired when I came of age, but she'd remember me, remember my father's wishes for me. Write to them too, all of them. We'll send enough letters that someone has to respond." Finn pulled paper and ink from the desk drawer. "Start now. I'll ride to the telegraph office, send wires to San Francisco and Boston both. Speed this up any way we can." They worked through the afternoon, Norah crafting careful letters while Finn composed telegrams. By evening, a stack of correspondence sat ready for the morning post, each one a plea for truth and justice, sent across 2,000 miles of wire and rail. That night, Norah couldn't face being alone in her cabin. She sat on Finn's porch instead, watching stars emerge, while he cleaned his rifle inside. The domestic normalcy of it, the sound of his movements, the occasional scrape of metal on metal, was oddly comforting. "How long do you think before we hear back?" she asked through the open door. "Telegraph to San Francisco, maybe 3 days if your uncle responds quick. Letters to Boston, 2 weeks minimum." He came out carrying 2 cups of coffee, handed her one. "It's going to feel like forever. And if they don't respond, if my uncle wants nothing to do with this, if my father's friends have forgotten me, then we find another way." Finn sat beside her close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cooling night. "I meant what I said to Taylor. You're under Triple M's protection. That means something. Why?" The question burst out before she could stop it. "Why are you doing all this?" "The money at the auction. I understand you said that was about your sister, but this fighting Thornton, risking your reputation, spending money on telegrams and lawyers, I'm just an employee. This goes so far beyond. You're not just an employee." Finn's voice was quiet but intense. "You haven't been for a while now. I just didn't want to say it, didn't want to make you uncomfortable, didn't want you to think I was expecting anything because of that contract." Norah's breath caught. "Finn, let me finish." He set down his coffee cup, turned to face her properly. "That day at the auction I saw Caroline in you. That's true. I saved you because I couldn't save her, because I needed to do something right after getting everything so wrong with my sister. But these past 3 months..." He shook his head. "You're not Caroline. You're Norah. You're smart and stubborn and brave in ways that terrify me. You made my chaos of a ranch into something organized. You won over Jake, which nobody ever does. You wear those trousers like armor, and you don't apologize for taking up space in the world." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I'm fighting for you because somewhere along the way I stopped seeing you as someone to save and started seeing you as someone I don't want to lose. And if that's too much, if I'm overstepping, tell me now and I'll back off. But you asked why, and that's why." Norah couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Every instinct screamed that this was dangerous, that opening her heart was asking for pain, that men couldn't be trusted with tender things. But Finn's eyes held no demand, no expectation, just honesty and hope and something that looked remarkably like love. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. I don't know how to let someone in without losing myself. Then don't lose yourself. Keep wearing the trousers. Keep being stubborn. Keep taking up space. His hand cupped her cheek gentle. I don't want you smaller. I want you exactly as you are. She kissed him, or he kissed her, or they met in the middle. It didn't matter. What mattered was the softness of it, the rightness, the feeling of coming home to a place she hadn't known existed. His arms came around her and she leaned into him, letting herself be held, letting herself want this. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Finn rested his forehead against hers. We should probably talk about this. Probably. Norah smiled despite everything. But maybe after we deal with Thornton, after Thornton, he agreed. But Norah, whatever happens, whatever he throws at us, we face it together. Deal. Deal. The peace lasted exactly 4 days. 4 days of waiting, of checking the mail, of nervous energy that had the whole ranch on edge. Then on Thursday afternoon, riders appeared on the horizon. 6 men moving fast, kicking up dust against the setting sun. Finn was in the barn when Jake came running. Company coming, armed by the look of them. Every hand on the ranch grabbed a rifle. By the time the riders thundered into the yard, Finn and his men stood ready, guns held low but available. The lead rider was unfamiliar, a hard-faced man with a deputy's badge pinned to his vest. Behind him rode 5 others, including 2 men Norah recognized from Thornton's saloon. Finn Morgan, the deputy called out. That's me. State your business. Deputy Marshal Frank Wade out of Santa Fe. I'm here for Norah Bennett. Got a warrant for her arrest on charges of theft and flight from lawful guardianship. She here. Norah stepped out of the house, her heart hammering but her head high. I'm here and those charges are false. That's for a judge to decide, ma'am. I'm just here to execute the warrant. Wade pulled a folded paper from his coat. You can come peaceful or we can make it hard. Your choice. Finn moved to stand beside Norah, his presence solid. Can I see the warrant? Wade handed it over. Finn read it carefully, his jaw getting tighter with each line. This is dated 2 days ago, issued by Judge Blackwell in Santa Fe on the basis of telegrams from Boston. That's right, all legal and proper. Judge Blackwell, Finn's voice was flat, who happens to owe Thornton money from gambling debts. This isn't law, Marshal. This is Thornton pulling strings. I don't care about politics, Morgan. I care about the law, and the law says I take Miss Bennett into custody pending trial. She's got rights. Right to legal representation, right to present evidence. She'll get all that at trial, but right now she's coming with me. The tension ratcheted up another notch. Jake and the other hand shifted, ready to fight. If Finn gave the word, the marshal's men tensed in response, hands moving toward their guns. One wrong move and this would turn into a bloodbath. Finn, Norah's voice was surprisingly steady. She put a hand on his arm. It's all right, I'll go. The hell you will. Listen to me. She looked him in the eyes, willing him to understand. If you fight this, people die. Maybe you, maybe Jake, maybe me, but if I go peacefully, we can fight this the right way, with lawyers and evidence and truth. That's what you said. Remember, we proved them wrong. Norah, trust me. She squeezed his arm. 2 weeks, you said. You've still got 10 days. Get the responses from Boston, from my uncle. Get the proof, then come get me out. Finn looked like he wanted to argue, wanted to fight, wanted to put himself between her and the world. But finally, agonizingly, he nodded. 10 days. And if you're not treated right, if anything happens to you, I know. She managed a small smile. You'll burn Santa Fe to the ground. Damn right I will. She gathered a few things from her cabin: clean clothes, her father's pocket watch, the letters she'd been writing. When she came back out, Wade had produced handcuffs. Finn's hand went to his gun. That's not necessary, he growled. Standard procedure for prisoners. She's not running. I gave you my word. Finn's eyes were hard as flint. Put those away, or I'll make you eat them. Wade considered, weighing his options. Finally, he shrugged and put the cuffs back on his belt. Fine, but she tries anything, it's on you. Norah mounted her horse between two of Wade's men, very aware of the guns surrounding her. As they prepared to ride out, Finn caught her stirrup, looked up at her, with eyes full of promises. 10 days, he repeated. I'm coming for you. I know. They rode out of Triple M as the sun touched the western hills. Norah looked back once and saw Finn standing in the yard, Jake beside him, both of them silhouetted against the dying light. Then the trail turned and they were gone, and she was alone with strangers, and the long ride to Santa Fe and whatever waited at the end. But she wasn't afraid. Not anymore, because for the first time in her life, someone was fighting for her. Someone believed in her. Someone loved her enough to move heaven and earth to prove her innocence. All she had to do was survive until he got there. The Santa Fe jail was cleaner than she'd expected, but no less a cage for all that. A small cell with a narrow bed, a washstand and bars that turned sunset into stripes across the stone floor. Wade had been professional, even kind in his way, making sure she had blankets and decent food. But kind or not, she was locked up, and the weight of it pressed on her chest like stones. The first 2 days crawled past. Norah spent them pacing, thinking, planning what she'd say at trial. The charges were theft and flight from guardianship, both civil matters, really not criminal. But Thornton's influence had twisted them into something darker, made her sound like a criminal instead of a frightened girl trying to escape an impossible situation. On the 3rd day, salvation arrived in the form of a telegram delivered to the jail. Wade brought it to her cell himself, his expression unreadable. Message came for you from San Francisco. Norah's hands shook as she unfolded the thin paper. The words were brief but beautiful. Norah, stop. Your father told me everything before he died. Stop. Have documentation. Stop. Arriving Santa Fe tomorrow with affidavits. Stop. Gerald is a liar and worse. Stop. Hold on. Stop. Uncle James. She read it 3 times, tears streaming down her face. He'd come, her uncle whom she'd barely known, whom her father had been estranged from. He was coming to help her. Her father had trusted him with the truth before he died, had made sure someone knew what Gerald really was. Good news? Wade asked. The best. Norah wiped her eyes. My uncle's a lawyer. He's bringing proof that the charges are false. Then I hope for your sake he gets here before the judge sets the trial date. Blackwell's scheduled you for day after tomorrow. 2 days. Her uncle would barely make it in time if he made it at all, but it was hope real and solid and enough to hold on to. That night, lying on the narrow jail cot, Norah thought about Finn, wondered if he'd gotten the letters back from Boston yet, if he was still fighting for her, if he knew about her arrest. Wondered if that kiss on the porch had been real, or just the desperate impulse of 2 scared people seeking comfort in each other. No, it had been real. She knew it the way she knew her own name. Finn Morgan didn't do things halfway. If he'd said he cared about her, he meant it. If he'd promised to come for her, he would. All she had to do was wait. Uncle James arrived the next morning looking like exactly what he was, a prosperous attorney used to courtrooms and respect. He was older than her father would have been, gray-haired and distinguished with sharp eyes that missed nothing. When Wade led him to Norah's cell, those eyes softened. My God, you look just like your mother. He shook his head. I should have checked on you after Charles died. Should have made sure you were all right. I'm sorry, child. You're here now. Norah gripped the bars. You said you have documentation, everything we need. He pulled papers from his case. Your father came to me 6 months before he died, said he knew his health was failing, knew Gerald would make trouble. He had me draw up a proper will separate from the one filed in Boston. This one leaves everything to you outright, no guardianship necessary. He also wrote a letter detailing Gerald's gambling debts, his threats, his attempts to force you into marriage with Ashford. Why didn't he tell me? Pride, probably. Didn't want you to know how bad things were with Gerald, but he made sure I knew, made sure I could protect you if needed. James smiled grimly. I also have affidavits from your father's clerk and your governess. Both confirm that you took only what was yours, that Gerald's theft accusations are fabricated to force your return. Will it be enough? It'll be more than enough to get these charges dismissed. And if I have anything to say about it, Gerald will face charges of his own for filing false reports. He looked at his niece with something like pride. You did well, Norah. Running took courage. Surviving took more. Your father would be proud. The words broke something open inside her. She'd been so afraid that her father would have been ashamed, would have thought her a coward for running instead of fighting. But he'd known. He'd prepared for this. He'd trusted his brother to protect her when he couldn't anymore. Thank you, she whispered, for coming, for believing me. Family looks after family. Even when we've been apart too long. He packed the papers away. Now let's go convince a judge that you're innocent and that Richard Thornton's a meddling fool who needs to mind his own business. The courtroom in Santa Fe was smaller than Norah had imagined, more like a large parlor than the grand halls of justice she'd pictured. Wooden benches lined the walls, a battered desk served as the judge's bench, and the territorial seal hung crooked on the adobe wall. But small or not, her entire future would be decided within these four walls. Judge Blackwell turned out to be a florid man in his 50s, with the broken veins of a heavy drinker and eyes that shifted away from direct contact. Norah disliked him on sight, and the feeling intensified when she saw Richard Thornton sitting in the front row, perfectly groomed and smiling like a cat with canary feathers on its whiskers. Uncle James sat beside her at the defendant's table, his presence solid and reassuring. Across the aisle, a nervous young prosecutor named Collins shuffled papers and avoided looking at anyone. The whole thing had the feel of a farce, a play where everyone knew their lines except the ending hadn't been written yet. All rise, the bailiff called, and Blackwell swept in with exaggerated importance. The charges were read. Norah stood and answered "not guilty" in a voice that didn't shake even though her hands were clenched so tight. Her nails bit into her palms. Then Uncle James rose and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Your Honor, before we proceed with testimony, I'd like to present evidence that demonstrates these charges are entirely without merit and were filed under false pretenses. Blackwell's eyes flickered to Thornton just for a second. Proceed, Counselor. James laid out the case with surgical precision. First, her father's true will, properly witnessed and notarized, leaving everything to Norah with no guardianship restrictions. Then the affidavits from Thomas Weaver and Mrs. Harper, both swearing that Norah had taken only her own possessions and that Gerald Bennett had threatened to force her into an unwanted marriage. Finally, a letter from Charles Bennett himself, written 6 months before his death and kept in James's safe, detailing his fears about what Gerald would do. My brother knew he was dying, James said quietly, holding up the letter so the judge could see Charles's distinctive handwriting. He knew his nephew was a gambling addict with debts he couldn't pay. He knew Gerald saw Norah's inheritance as the solution to his financial problems. So he took steps to protect his daughter, legal steps, proper steps, steps that make a mockery of these false charges. Collins stood shakily. Your Honor, even if Miss Bennett's inheritance is in question, she still fled legal guardianship. Guardianship established under a will that wasn't my brother's final testament. James interrupted smoothly. This document supersedes the one filed in Boston. In the eyes of the law, Norah was never under Gerald Bennett's guardianship. She was a free woman of legal age with full rights to her inheritance. She didn't flee anything, she simply left a dangerous situation, as was her right. The charges from Boston, Collins tried again, were fabricated by a desperate man trying to reclaim access to money that was never his. James pulled out another document. I also have a telegram here from the Boston Police Department confirming that no theft charges were ever officially filed. Mr. Gerald Bennett made threats, yes, but he never actually went to the authorities because he knew his claims wouldn't stand up to scrutiny. The warrant issued for Miss Bennett's arrest was based entirely on false representations made to Judge Blackwell. He turned to look directly at the judge, and his voice hardened. False representations that I'm given to understand came through Mr. Richard Thornton, who has no legal standing in this matter whatsoever, and whose motives are at best questionable. Thornton's smile finally slipped. He stood abruptly. Your Honor, I was simply trying to help. Sit down, Mr. Thornton, Blackwell snapped. You're not a party to these proceedings. Then why is he here? James pressed. Why is a saloon owner from Copper Creek sitting in on a hearing about a Boston inheritance dispute? Unless, of course, he has some personal interest in seeing Miss Bennett imprisoned. Some grudge, perhaps stemming from being outbid at a rather unseemly auction 3 months ago. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Norah watched Thornton's face flush with rage, watched his hand twitch toward his coat. But there were too many witnesses, too much attention. He forced himself still, but his eyes promised murder. Blackwell banged his gavel. Order, Mr. Clayton. I'll thank you to keep your insinuations to yourself. They're not insinuations, Your Honor. They're documented facts. James remained calm. But I'll move on. The simple truth is this: my niece committed no crime. The charges against her are based on lies, told by a greedy relative and amplified by a vindictive man with a personal axe to grind. I'm requesting immediate dismissal of all charges and Miss Bennett's release from custody. Collins looked desperately at the judge, but he had nothing left to argue. The evidence was overwhelming, the documentation irrefutable. Even Blackwell, crooked as he might be, couldn't ignore the truth laid out so plainly. I'll take a brief recess to review the evidence, Blackwell muttered and fled to his chambers. The 10 minutes he was gone felt like hours. Norah sat rigid, not daring to hope, not daring to breathe. Uncle James patted her hand once, a brief gesture of reassurance, then sat calm and patient, as if he'd already won. Maybe he had. When Blackwell returned, his face was sour but resigned. Having reviewed the documentation presented by Mr. Clayton, I find that the charges against Miss Norah Bennett are unsupported by evidence. The warrant issued for her arrest was based on false information. All charges are dismissed. Miss Bennett, you're free to go. The relief hit Norah like a physical blow. Her knees buckled and she grabbed the table for support. Uncle James caught her elbow, steadying her, his eyes bright with triumph. Thank you, Your Honor, he said formally, then lower to Norah. Let's get you out of here before he changes his mind. They were halfway to the door when Thornton stepped into their path. Up close, his rage was palpable, vibrating off him like heat from a stove. This isn't over, he said quietly so only they could hear. You think you've won, but I always get what I want. Always. Are you threatening my client, Mr. Thornton? James's voice was mild, but his eyes were steel. Because I'm sure Judge Blackwell would be interested to hear about that, especially after I file a complaint about the false warrant and your role in procuring it. You can't prove anything. I can prove you had telegrams sent to Boston fishing for dirt on Miss Bennett. I can prove you met with Judge Blackwell the day before the warrant was issued. I can prove you've been harassing my niece for months. James smiled, and it was nothing like friendly. I'm a very good lawyer, Mr. Thornton. Push me, and I'll bury you in litigation so deep you'll never see daylight again. For a moment, Thornton looked like he might do something stupid. His hand moved toward his coat again, where Norah knew he kept a derringer, but the bailiff was watching, and Collins and a dozen other people. Slowly, his hand fell back to his side. We'll see, he said. We'll see who's standing when the dust settles. He pushed past them and out into the bright afternoon. James watched him go, his expression thoughtful. That man's dangerous, Norah. He won't let this go. I know. But right now she couldn't bring herself to care. She was free. The charges were dismissed. Her name was cleared and she could go home. Can you stay a few days? I want you to meet someone. The man who saved me at that auction. Finn Morgan. I'd like that. And I'd like to make sure you're truly safe before I head back to California. He offered his arm. Come on, let's collect your things and find a decent hotel. You've spent enough time in jail cells. They walked out of the courthouse into golden afternoon sunlight. Norah tilted her face up to it, feeling the warmth soak into her skin, tasting freedom like honey on her tongue. Behind them, the door opened and closed as people filed out the business of the day, continuing. She was so caught up in the moment that she almost missed the figure standing across the street, leaning against a hitching post, with the patient stance of someone who'd been waiting a while. Then her eyes focused and her heart stopped. Finn. He was dusty from hard riding, his clothes travel-stained, his face shadowed by his hat. But when their eyes met across that dusty street, the world narrowed to just the two of them. He straightened, took a step forward, then stopped, waiting, giving her the choice to come to him or not. Norah didn't remember deciding to run. She just found herself flying across the street, her skirts tangling around her legs. She'd worn the blue dress for court, and then she was in his arms, and he was lifting her off the ground, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. And it was perfect. "You came," she gasped against his shoulder. "Told you I would." His voice was rough, choked with emotion. "Got the telegraph about the hearing yesterday. Rode straight through the night to get here. Couldn't let you face it alone. My uncle came, brought evidence. The charges are dismissed, Finn. I'm free." "I know, I was in the courtroom, back row." He set her down gently, his hands framing her face. "Watched you stand there, so brave, so strong. Watched that uncle of yours tear apart their case. Watched you win." "We won," she corrected. "We did this together." "Yeah," his thumb brushed across her cheekbone. "We did." "Mr. Morgan, I presume?" Uncle James had followed at a more sedate pace. He extended his hand. "James Clayton, thank you for looking after my niece." Finn shook his hand reluctantly, releasing Norah to do so. "Finn Morgan, and it was my privilege, sir. She's been looking after herself mostly. I just tried not to get in the way." "He's lying," Norah said. "He saved my life. He's been fighting for me since the day we met." "Then I'm in your debt, Mr. Morgan." James studied him with a lawyer's assessing eye. "Norah mentioned you run a cattle ranch, the Triple M." "Yes, sir. About 15 sections, 2,000 head. It's not much." "It's everything," Norah interrupted softly. "It's home." Something shifted in James's expression, some calculation or decision made. "I see. Well then, Mr. Morgan, perhaps you'd join us for dinner this evening. I'd like to discuss my niece's future, and it seems you have a significant stake in that conversation." They ate at the best restaurant in Santa Fe, a surprisingly elegant place with white tablecloths and real crystal. Over steak and potatoes, James laid out his proposal. Norah's inheritance was substantial, nearly $50,000 in property investments and cash once all of her father's affairs were settled. She was a wealthy woman in her own right, beholden to no one. "You could come to San Francisco," James said. "I have a large house, plenty of room. You could live there, be part of society, make a proper match." "I have a home," Norah said firmly, "and I have work I love. I'm not interested in society or proper matches, Uncle James. I'm interested in building something real." James smiled. "I thought you might say that. In which case, I'd like to propose investing some of your inheritance in the Triple M Ranch. Expansion capital, if Mr. Morgan is interested. New breeding stock, perhaps, or improvements to the property. In return, you'd own a stake in the operation, become a true partner rather than just an employee." Finn had gone very still. "Sir, I can't let Norah risk her inheritance on what, a working ranch with a proven track record and an honest man running it." James raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Morgan, I've been a lawyer for 30 years. I can read people. You're exactly the kind of man I'd trust with my niece's money. More importantly, you're the kind of man I'd trust with my niece's heart. And unless I'm very much mistaken, that ship has already sailed." Finn looked at Norah, and the tenderness in his eyes made her breath catch. "That's up to Norah. It's up to both of us," she said. "But yes, Uncle James, the ship has sailed." James raised his glass. "Then let's drink to new partnerships, business and otherwise." They rode back to the Triple M the next day, the three of them, Norah, Finn, and James, who'd insisted on seeing the ranch before he returned to California. The journey felt different from that first desperate ride 3 months ago. Then Norah had been running from one prison toward an uncertain freedom. Now she was riding home, truly home, with a future she'd chosen for herself. The ranch looked golden in the late afternoon light, the adobe buildings warm and welcoming smoke rising from the cookhouse chimney. The hands came out when they heard the horses, and the celebration that erupted when they learned Norah was free and cleared was loud and genuine. Jake actually smiled, a rare sight that cracked his weathered face into unfamiliar lines. Knew you'd beat that snake, Thornton. Stubborn as you are, there wasn't any other way it could go. Sam and Tom clapped her on the back like she was one of them, which she realized she was. Miguel nodded respectfully and said something in Spanish that made her laugh. Even the newest hand, a quiet boy named Danny, who'd been hired while she was in jail, looked pleased. Uncle James stayed 3 days touring the ranch, examining the books, asking endless questions about operations and profit margins and future plans. On his last evening, he sat with Norah and Finn on the porch of the main house and handed Finn a bank draft that made the rancher's eyes go wide. $10,000, James said calmly. Enough to double your herd, improve your grazing land, maybe even buy that section you've had your eye on to the north. It's an investment in the Triple M, but more than that, it's an investment in my niece's future. Treat it wisely. I will, sir. Finn folded the draft with careful hands. You have my word. I know I do. James stood preparing to retire for the night. I'll head back to San Francisco tomorrow, but I'll be in regular contact. And Norah, you're always welcome if you want to visit, but something tells me you're exactly where you belong. After he went inside, Norah and Finn sat in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. It was Finn who finally spoke. Marry me. Norah's heart jumped. She turned to look at him, found him watching her with those steady gray-green eyes, nervous but certain. Finn, I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other 3 months, but I also know that I don't want to spend another day wondering if you might leave, if this might all disappear. He took her hand, his calluses rough against her skin. I'm not offering a cage, Norah. I'm offering a partnership, a life built together where you make your own choices and wear your own clothes and take up all the space you want. I'm offering respect and work and a home that's yours as much as mine. And love? She asked softly. So much love I don't know what to do with it all. His thumb traced circles on her wrist. But only if you want it. Only if you choose it. I won't trap you, won't pressure you. If you want to stay as business partners and nothing more, I'll respect that. But if there's any chance you might feel the same way I do. She kissed him to stop the words, to show him what her heart had known for weeks now. When they broke apart, both of them were smiling. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes to partnership and respect and building something together. Yes to all of it. The wedding happened 2 weeks later, small and simple, in the parlor of the Triple M ranch house. Uncle James returned for it, and Jake stood up as Finn's best man, and Martha Holbrook from the general store agreed to be Norah's witness. Sheriff Taylor attended too, along with half the ranchers in the county, all of them curious to see the woman in pants finally married off. Except Norah didn't wear a dress to her own wedding. She wore her trousers, the same brown canvas pants she'd been arrested in all those months ago, with a white shirt and a vest embroidered with blue flowers that Martha had helped her make. Her hair was pinned up simply, and she carried wild flowers picked that morning from the creek bank. Some of the guests whispered. Some looked scandalized. But Finn, standing at the makeshift altar in his best suit, smiled like she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. I take thee, Norah, he said. When it came time for vows, exactly as you are, in trousers or dresses on horseback, or behind a desk in sunshine or storm, I promise to respect your choices, honor your voice, and love you with everything I have. This I swear. I take thee, Finn, Norah replied, her voice strong and clear, as partner and equal as friend and love. I promise to work beside you, fight beside you, and build a life with you based on honesty and respect. This I swear. When the preacher pronounced them married, Finn kissed her gentle and sure, and the room erupted in applause. Even the skeptics couldn't help but be moved by the obvious love between them, the rightness of two people who'd fought so hard to find each other. The celebration lasted until dawn. There was music and dancing and more food than 50 people could eat. Jake got quietly drunk and told stories about Finn as a boy that made everyone laugh. Uncle James gave a toast about finding family in unexpected places, and Richard Thornton notably was nowhere to be seen. He'd left town the day after the trial, some said. Others claimed he'd been forced out by creditors finally calling in his debts. A few whispered that the territorial government was investigating his business practices, asking uncomfortable questions about bribes and fixed games and girls who'd disappeared from his saloon. Whatever the truth, he was gone, and that was victory enough. A year passed like a dream made solid. The Triple M thrived with the new investment capital. Finn bought the northern section and improved the grazing land, and the herd grew fat and profitable. Norah's careful management meant they ended the year with money in the bank and debts paid off ahead of schedule. More than that, they were happy. Working side by side during the day, falling into bed, exhausted at night, building a life that was messy and real and entirely their own. They argued sometimes Norah was too stubborn and Finn too cautious, and neither of them was good at backing down, but they always worked it out, always found their way back to the same side. Spring brought new calves, and with them, morning sickness that had Norah bent over a bucket cursing in 2 languages. Finn found her one morning in the barn, pale and miserable, and the realization hit them both at the same time. "A baby," he whispered, wonder and terror mixing in his voice. "A baby," Norah confirmed, one hand on her still flat stomach. "Are we ready for this?" "No." He pulled her close, rested his chin on top of her head. "But we'll figure it out, same as we figured out everything else, together." The pregnancy was difficult. Norah was sick for months, and the summer heat made everything worse. But she refused to be coddled, working right up until the 8th month, when even her stubbornness had to bow to physical reality. She spent the last weeks on the porch of their house. The main house was theirs now, the hands having built themselves a new bunkhouse, watching the ranch operations and yelling instructions to anyone who'd listen. "You're supposed to be resting," Finn told her one afternoon, finding her squinting at the account books. "I am resting. See, I'm sitting." She shifted uncomfortably. "This baby has feet like a mule, keeps kicking my ribs. He or she is probably trying to escape. Can't say I blame them with you as a mother. Poor kid doesn't stand a chance of ever sitting still." She threw a pencil at him. He caught it, laughing, and kissed her soundly. "I love you, Norah Morgan." "Love you too," she grumbled. "Even though you did this to me. Pretty sure you were involved in the process." Details. The baby came in October, just as the leaves on the cottonwoods turned gold. It was a hard labor, 20 hours, that left Norah exhausted and Finn gray with worry. But when their daughter finally arrived, screaming her fury at the world, everything else faded away. They named her Caroline after Finn's sister. Caroline Morgan, born in trousers and freedom, daughter of a stubborn Boston banker's daughter and a cowboy who dared to love her exactly as she was. Now, standing on the porch with that daughter, heavy in her belly, and her husband training horses in the corral, Norah reflected on the strange path that had led her here. From that auction block in Copper Creek to this moment, wife, mother, rancher, free woman. Finn looked up and caught her watching. "What are you thinking about?" he called. "Everything." She rested both hands on her swollen stomach. "Nothing, just grateful." He walked over, sweaty and dusty from working with the horses, and kissed her temple. "Me too." "Finn." She covered his hand on her belly, felt their daughter kick against both their palms. "Will our children be allowed to wear pants?" He smiled that slow, warm smile she loved. Our daughter or son will wear whatever they damn well please, just like their mother, just like it should be. Inside Norah, the baby kicked again, strong and sure, and she thought about the world this child would grow up in. It wouldn't be perfect, the world never was. There would still be people who judged, who condemned, who tried to put women in boxes and tell them who to be. But their daughter would have something Norah hadn't: parents who believed in her right to choose her own path, to wear her own clothes, to take up space in the world without apology. That was worth more than all the inheritances in Boston, worth more than gold or cattle or land. Freedom, real freedom, wasn't just the absence of chains. It was the presence of choice, the right to be yourself without fear, without shame, without compromise. And standing there on the porch of the Triple M Ranch, trousers on her legs and love in her heart, Norah Bennett Morgan knew she'd finally found it. The desert wind whispered through the cottonwoods, carrying the sound of horses and men's voices and the eternal promise of tomorrow. Somewhere beyond the hills, the world was still turning, still full of injustice and struggle, and women fighting for the same freedoms Norah had found. But here, in this small corner of Arizona territory, two people had built something worth defending: a partnership of equals, a love without conditions, a home where anyone could be exactly who they were meant to be, and that more than any law or custom or society's approval was the only kind of freedom that ever really mattered.